You see, when someone starts playing emotional games with you, silent treatments, hot and cold behavior, manufactured jealousy, what's really happening is that they've turned the relationship into a power dynamic. It's no longer about two people building something meaningful. It's become a contest, a strategic game to see who can control the other's emotional state. The tragedy is most people don't even realize that they're on the board. They've already made their first move without even knowing they were playing. And once you're drawn in, it becomes incredibly difficult to think clearly, let alone act with strength and integrity. This is what emotional games are. They're bait. They're carefully crafted tests meant to provoke you, to pull a reaction from you, to make you prove your worth under pressure. They're designed to see how much of yourself you're willing to sacrifice for crumbs of validation. But you don't win by playing harder, you win by refusing to play at all. And that requires a brutal kind of clarity. It means you have to look at what's actually happening, not what you wish was happening. You may want connection, depth, authenticity, but if she's running a pattern of confusion and inconsistency, that's not love. That's manipulation. That's someone saying, I'm going to control how you feel by controlling how I show up. And if you bite that hook, you're finished before the game even really begins. The strongest position you can hold is one of non-participation. Not apathy, not cruelty, not bitterness, but conscious disengagement. It's not that you don't care. It's that you care enough about your mental clarity and emotional integrity not to hand them over to someone who's weaponizing attention. That's what absolute detachment looks like. It's strength, not weakness. It's clarity, not numbness. But here's the problem. We're biologically wired to respond to social rejection. When someone pulls away, especially someone we've been emotionally invested in, we panic. That's the attachment system kicking in. We want to chase, to fix, to restabilize the bond. But if you chase, you confirm the game works. You validate the tactic. You say, yes, you can control me through inconsistency. And once that precedent is set, the pattern repeats. It becomes the default dynamic. But if you resist that urge, if you stand still in the silence and let the anxiety pass through you without acting on it, you break the script. You remove the feedback loop she was depending on. You tell her, without saying a word, that you will not be manipulated by uncertainty. That is the moment the game loses power. And you'll notice something when you do this. There's an immediate shift. When you stop responding to chaos, the person who is playing you will often escalate. They might accuse you of not caring. They might try to guilt you, seduce you, even provoke you into anger. Why? Because they need your reaction. Your emotional energy is their reward. When you deny it, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect, they're left alone with their own tactics. They're forced to confront the fact that their games no longer work on you. That's the discomfort you have to be willing to sit in. That's the price of emotional strength. It's not comfortable, it's not glamorous, but it's powerful because you're not just detaching from a person, you're detaching from the belief that your value is something you have to prove to someone who's testing you. That's the real trap. When you feel like you have to prove your worth, you've already forgotten it. This doesn't mean you become cold or unreachable. It means you become solid. It means you operate from a position of internal stability, not external validation. You become the person who doesn't flinch when the silence gets loud, who doesn't chase when attention is withdrawn, who doesn't fold when manipulation shows up dressed as desire. That kind of strength is rare, and people feel it immediately. It makes the games fall apart. So when she starts playing games, when you sense that shift from connection to control, step back, observe, don't react, and above all, refuse to participate. Because the minute you step on that board, you're not in a relationship anymore. You're in a battle for emotional dominance. And no one wins that game without losing themselves. The most powerful move you can make is to not move at all. One of the most potent psychological plays someone can make when they're trying to keep control is to test whether you're still emotionally reactive to them. See, when she reaches out after pulling away, it's rarely about reconnection in the purest sense. More often, it's a gauge, a test, a probe into your emotional boundaries. She wants to know, Are you still hooked? Do you still crave her attention? Will you abandon your progress the moment she tosses out a breadcrumb of interest? And what most men do, what most people do, is fail this test because it's subtle. It doesn't look like a test. It looks like a friendly message or a flirty comment on social media or some vague reappearance that plays on nostalgia. And in that moment, you're flooded with old emotions. You're reminded of what once was or what you hoped could be. And before you realize it, you're engaging. You're giving her the one thing she needs to keep her position of control intact, your attention. But when you're detached, truly detached, you see the pattern. You recognize that silence followed by sudden re-engagement is not some divine timing. It's a psychological maneuver. It's a way to reset the power balance. And if you respond with the same emotional energy as before, even if you're telling yourself you're just being polite, you're telling her, you still have access to my emotional world. I'm still open to being affected by you. That's why the real power lies in measured responses, if any response is even necessary. It's not about playing hard to get or pretending you don't care. That's still performance. It's about actually reaching a state where you're no longer seeking anything from her. Not clarity, not closure, not connection. When she senses that, truly senses that, you no longer orbit her validation. Something shifts. It breaks the reward loop. She expected you to chase. She expected emotional proof that she still holds significance, and instead she's met with calm neutrality, indifference, not out of anger, but out of evolution. You see, emotional detachment is often misunderstood. It's not coldness, it's control. It's the result of choosing logic over impulse, because the impulse says, she's reaching out, maybe she's changed, maybe this is the breakthrough. But logic says, if it took her vanishing for weeks to realize she misses you, then this isn't about love, it's about control. It's about seeing if the door is still open. And if you always leave that door cracked, just in case, you'll never fully reclaim your self-respect. When you've seen the cycle for what it is, you start to realize that attention is your currency. It's the one thing you have complete control over. And if you spend it carelessly on mixed signals, half-truths, or people who disappeared when things got difficult, you're bankrupting yourself emotionally. And for what? For someone who's not even sure they want to stay? There's a profound strength in being unbothered, in not needing to explain your silence, in not offering emotional closure to someone who forfeited their seat at the table. That doesn't make you cruel. That makes you discerning. It means you understand your value and that your presence is a privilege, not something to be tested, stretched, or played with. When she reaches out and you're no longer emotionally tethered, you might feel the urge to respond as the old version of you, the one who needed her to understand, to see your worth, to validate the pain she caused. But that version of you is gone. And in its place is someone who has come to understand that real peace isn't found in convincing someone to stay. It's found in knowing you don't have to. Let her wonder. Let her feel the space she created. Let her sit with the silence that used to be filled with your anxious energy, your willingness to chase, your emotional generosity. Because the moment you stopped reacting, you stopped feeding the dynamic. And without your energy, the game loses its structure. There's a gravity that comes with being emotionally grounded. It's subtle but undeniable. It communicates something louder than words. I'm not here to be played. I'm not here to perform for scraps. I've grown past needing approval from people who didn't value my presence when they had it. That kind of man is rare, and rare things are respected, even by those who once took them for granted. So when she circles back, when she floats in with ambiguity, hoping to stir something in you, understand this. It's not a romantic moment. It's a psychological checkpoint, and your response, or your lack of one, determines whether she still has power. Don't flinch. Don't justify. Don't break your progress for temporary validation. When you stop being predictable, you become powerful. When someone who once dismissed you suddenly tries to re-enter your life, often under the guise of casual conversation or lighthearted banter, there's a deeper undercurrent at play, one most people miss. It's not always about rekindling anything real. Sometimes it's about reestablishing emotional control. And they do this by slipping into your life subtly, acting like nothing ever happened. No acknowledgement of the silence, no accountability, just an easy reappearance. And they're banking on one thing, that you'll engage out of familiarity, or worse, out of hope. You need to understand that one of the most effective psychological tactics someone can use when they sense they're losing grip on you is to reappear without explanation. It's disorienting. It creates a cognitive dissonance. Your mind wants to reconcile the fact that they vanished with the fact that now they're behaving as if they didn't. And in your confusion, you default to your old emotional habits. You respond, you participate, you entertain the interaction. But here's the problem with that. When you respond like nothing happened, when you allow them to slip back in seamlessly, you communicate something extremely dangerous to your own psyche. You signal that your standards are negotiable. You unconsciously tell yourself and them that disappearing, dismissing, or disrespecting you has no lasting consequence. That your door remains open regardless of how it was treated. And this has a ripple effect, not just on this interaction, but on the way you perceive yourself going forward. Because every time you allow inconsistency to pass unchallenged, you're reinforcing the idea that you don't require consistency to feel connected. You're saying, I'll take what I can get instead of, I know what I deserve. Now, let's not misunderstand this. It's not about becoming cold or vengeful. It's about being conscious. It's about making decisions rooted in clarity rather than compulsion. Because the truth is, when someone who once ignored you starts acting like everything's fine, they're often trying to reset the emotional playing field without addressing the damage. They want to resume the dynamic without doing the work. That's not connection. That's manipulation masked in charm. And this is where detachment becomes your greatest ally. If you're still emotionally entangled, still craving their approval or hoping for reconciliation, you'll fall for it. You'll take the bait. You'll rationalize their behavior. You'll tell yourself they're reaching out because they miss you, because they've changed, because deep down they care, but you won't look at what's real. You'll cling to what's familiar. However, if you've done the work, if you've truly detached, you'll recognize the pattern for what it is. You'll see that anyone who reappears without ownership of their disappearance isn't looking to repair anything. They're testing the waters. They're checking if your emotional boundaries are firm or still pliable. And the strength of your response or your silence will tell them everything they need to know. So what do? You respond with clarity, with calm, or sometimes with nothing at all. You don't pretend nothing happened. You don't allow the past to be glossed over in favor of a temporary emotional high, because that high comes with a crash. And you've crashed enough times to know better. The key is remembering who you became in their absence. All the progress, the healing, the internal rewiring, it wasn't for show. It was to build a version of you that no longer needs to be chosen by someone who made you feel like an option. It was to learn that attention isn't love, and presence without accountability is just a performance. When someone returns to your life and acts like nothing happened, what they're really saying is, I'm not ready to address the past, but I still want access to you. And it's your job to decide whether you're willing to lower yourself back into a dynamic that nearly broke you, or if you've elevated far enough to see it for what it is, unfinished business disguised as opportunity. And here's the irony. When you don't respond the way they expect, when you hold the line, when you don't make it easy for them to re-enter, that's when they feel the weight of their own absence. That's when they realize the door doesn't swing the same way it used to. Not because you're bitter, but because... So when she comes back, laughing like nothing happened, pretending the silence wasn't deliberate, hoping your heart still holds the door open, don't flinch, don't explain. Don't reattach to the old narrative. Simply remember who you are now and let your boundaries do the talking, because sometimes silence speaks loudest. When you choose not to respond emotionally to her sudden reappearance, especially after weeks of silence, you do something far more powerful than most people ever realize. You interrupt the script. See, there's often an expectation behind the reach out, a hope, sometimes even an assumption, that you're still emotionally available, still lingering in that same place of confusion, longing, or attachment. And when you don't meet that expectation, when you remain steady, calm, even indifferent, it disrupts the dynamic entirely. Most people respond out of instinct. They respond because they're still emotionally entangled, still holding on to what could have been, or worse, to what they hoped the other person would become. So when she suddenly sends a hey or a vague message that holds no real weight but just enough emotional bait, they take it. They respond out of habit, out of a need for closure, out of the illusion that maybe this time will be different. But here's the thing. If you truly want to reclaim your sense of power, your sense of grounded masculinity, you have to resist that reflex. You have to sit with the discomfort that rises when she tries to press that old emotional button and it no longer works. That's when you know you've grown. That's when you know your self-respect is intact. It's not about ignoring her to play games. That's not the point. It's about honoring the work you've done on yourself. It's about recognizing that her sudden return doesn't automatically entitle her to emotional access. You're not a revolving door. You're not some emotional safety net waiting to catch her when the world doesn't respond the way she expected. You're a man with values, with boundaries, and with clarity. Now, emotional detachment doesn't mean you're bitter. It doesn't mean you wish her harm, quite the opposite. It means you wish her well, but from a distance. It means you've reached a place where your peace matters more than reactivating old wounds, and that peace is fragile. It's not worth risking over a vague message or a half-hearted attempt at reconnection. Because if we're honest, most of these messages aren't really about you, they're about her. They're about her emotional needs, her uncertainty, her need to know whether she still has influence over you. And that's why your response matters. Because when you don't react, when you don't jump, when you don't go back into that old pattern of seeking clarity where there is none, you become untouchable, not in a cold, heartless way, but in a way that says, I know who I am now, and I won't go backwards. People who ghost, who disappear, who ignore you during your vulnerable moments, often don't expect you to grow in their absence. They expect to return to the version of you they left behind. And when they don't find that version anymore, they're faced with something uncomfortable. Your evolution, your healing, your detachment. There's a strange kind of power in that, the power to simply let things be, to not chase answers, to not chase people, to not chase closure. You realize that the closure was never in their hands. It was always yours. You didn't need their apology to move forward. You didn't need their explanation to feel whole. You found peace by facing the pain head on, by sitting with the silence, by learning to validate yourself when no one else was there to do it for you. So when she reaches out and you stay grounded, when you don't rush to reply or worse, try to resurrect the past, you're telling yourself something far more important than anything you could tell her. You're telling yourself that your time matters, that your heart matters, that your standards aren't conditional. You're not detaching because you don't care. You're detaching because you finally understand that caring for yourself means not entertaining patterns that once kept you stuck. You're not avoiding the conversation out of fear. You're doing it out of wisdom. You've seen what happens when you get pulled back in. You've felt the emotional hangover of investing in something that only leaves you drained. So you choose calm, you choose silence, not because it's easy, but because it's powerful, because it gives you space to think, to reflect, to assess whether her message is really about rebuilding something meaningful or just scratching an emotional itch. And more often than not, if there's no accountability, no sincerity, and no depth, it's the latter. You don't need to punish her. You don't need to lecture her. You simply need to remain centered. That alone is a statement. That alone speaks louder than any reply. Because when someone realizes they can no longer trigger you, no longer pull you into emotional chaos with a single message, that's when they truly understand what they lost. Not just your presence, but the version of you that once tolerated inconsistency. And so you sit with that power, not to dominate, not to gloat, but to protect the peace you fought so hard to build. And when she wonders why you're not biting the bait, when she starts to feel that emotional distance she didn't expect, she'll begin to understand that you've outgrown the game entirely. Because when your peace becomes non-negotiable, your presence becomes invaluable. When you finally learn to observe without reacting, everything changes. That's when you become truly dangerous to someone who relied on your emotional vulnerability to control the narrative. You see, so much of what manipulative behavior thrives on is your reaction, your confusion, your hope, your frustration, your need to fix things or to be understood. And when she reaches out after weeks of silence, that's precisely what she's banking on, that your emotions will betray you, that you'll still be sitting in the emotional fog she left behind, waiting for clarity, hoping for some sign that it all meant something. But when you refuse to react, when you detach, not with bitterness, but with clarity, you deny the entire game its fuel, you don't allow yourself to be the predictable variable anymore. And in that quiet, in that stillness, you reclaim your strength. You're not chasing answers. You're not scrambling to decode her message. You're not trying to meet her halfway when she wasn't willing to take a single step forward for weeks. Instead, you're watching, you're listening, you're observing not just her actions, but your own responses. And that's where the real growth happens. Emotional detachment is not about being cold. It's about being clear. You can still feel, you can still care, but you do so with boundaries. You no longer let yourself get pulled into a cycle that cost you peace the last time, because you remember. You remember what it felt like to be kept on a string, emotionally manipulated by just enough crumbs of affection to keep you invested. You remember how confusing it was to give your heart to someone who only wanted it when it was convenient for them. So now when she resurfaces and you don't react, when you don't run toward the message, don't overthink its meaning, don't lose sleep trying to figure out what changed, it shocks her. Because she expected the old you, the one who would have dropped everything for that single breadcrumb. But now, you've changed. You've learned to sit with silence. You've learned to trust actions over words. You've learned that peace isn't something you negotiate with people who once violated it. The truth is, when you stop reacting, you create space. And in that space, something powerful happens. She has to sit with the weight of her own behavior. For perhaps the first time, there's no immediate emotional cushion, no validation from you, no reassurance that she still has a hold on your heart. And that discomfort, that's where she'll begin to understand the consequences of inconsistency. You see, most people who play emotional games expect a reaction, because that's what keeps the cycle alive. But when there's no reaction, there's no cycle. There's just reality. And reality can be uncomfortable for those who once held power through manipulation. Your silence becomes a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They reflect. They show people who they've been without distortion. But they also show who you've become. And what you've become is someone who doesn't need chaos to feel connection. Someone who doesn't chase what's unclear. Someone who doesn't negotiate their worth based on someone else's indecision. You've become someone grounded enough to feel the emotional pull, but disciplined enough not to act on it. Because this isn't about her anymore, it's about you. It's about the version of you who used to wait by the phone, who used to analyze every word, who used to replay conversations looking for clues. That version of you has outgrown this dynamic. That version of you has learned that attention isn't always affection, that a message isn't always a sign of change, and that sometimes the best response is no response at all. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And the irony is, the less you react, the more powerful you become in her eyes. Because now she has to wonder, she has to sit with the absence of your energy. She has to feel what it's like when she no longer has emotional access to you. And that mystery, that emotional distance, it stings far more than any message ever could. So you stand still, you breathe, you remain unshaken. Because detachment is not indifference, it's inner peace that no longer depends on someone else's presence or absence. You've built that peace, you've earned it, and you're not going to trade it for a message that says, hey, without the weight of real accountability behind it. In the end, your power is in your restraint. Your silence speaks volumes. And when she realizes that her words no longer penetrate your world like they used to, that's when the balance shifts completely. Not because you tried to win, but because you stopped playing, Because when you no longer react, you no longer lose.